As it turned out, the whole damn city of Re-Bloom-Rusher was only half on fire. It took a few hours going down the other side of the cloud-shrouded pass before Liam could survey the reported damage. The city at the bottom of the valley was still over a day distant, but he could still make out the general details. "It looks like only the lower city was affected," he said. "Of course," Olin snorted. "It's the only place where a fire like that could happen in this weather." Liam nodded in agreement as he scanned the smoldering skeletons of the buildings in Re-Bloom-Rusher's common districts. Living in the city was a crowded affair. Apartments were cramped, buildings were crammed close together to maximize the use of the space inside the walls, and all manner of refuse tended to collect out of sight of the major streets. Given Marquis Bloomrush's reputation, Liam wouldn't be surprised if the city's ruler cut corners to save on what he might consider unnecessary maintenance. His eyes went to the formidable castle atop the hill in the upper city. "Does Marquis Bloomrush usually stay in the city?" Liam asked. "No," Olin answered, "he's usually in the capital." "Then who's in charge here?" "Bloomrush's eldest son, Reginald. He's not someone we want to get involved with." "What is that?" Olin gave him a strange look. "Why? Have you ever been around the kid of a High Lord before?" "No." "Then pray that you never do. He's not part of the bunch we're doing anything with anyway, so we don't need to get anywhere near House Bloomrush." The man's answer wasn't very satisfactory, but he had a point. They were going to the city to exchange their cargo for whatever Beaumont County needed to survive until the next harvest and to hire essential household staff. That evening, as they settled into their camp atop a ridge overlooking the valley, Liam shared his findings with the Countess. "This isn't good," Lady Beaumont said as she bit her lip, "and not only in the general sense. Based on your description of the damage to the common districts, it will be difficult to negotiate any price for the supplies that we need. Do you have any other options?" Liam asked. "The only option is to go to the source," the Countess answered. "Hopefully some of my peers still reside within the city." "But didn't they say that the nobles shut their granaries?" "I did," Lady Beaumont said. "But that means different things to different people. A merchant wouldn't be able to obtain a single bushel no matter how much gold they offer, but the word of a fellow noble will open many doors." "That hardly seems fair," Claire said. "Why should the word of a noble be worth more than that of a merchant or anyone else?" Claire's question drew the attention of every man around the fire. Countess Beaumont raised her chin as she coolly regarded her maid. "I suppose I should forgive you for your ignorance considering where you were raised," the Countess said. "What's that supposed to mean?" The maid crossed her arms. "It means precisely what it means," the Countess replied. "You were raised as an urbanite, so you interpret the world as one. The ties that bind what passes as your communities are weak. A man operating a food stand could be replaced by another and no one would bat an eyelash unless they were in some way related to him. Most don't even know how their food reaches the market in the first place beyond some vague notion that a farm exists somewhere to supply it. Every laborer has 100 replacements waiting to take their place. For that same reason, the fear and selfishness of the citizens are magnified 1,000-fold. By the same token, you allow the guilds to oppress you and do their bidding no matter how callously you are discarded. The aristocratic establishment, on the other hand, is an institution in which every member, from the highest of high nobles to the brave pioneers on the fringes of civilization, is part of a collective, multi-generational effort to build the future. When I act in my capacity as a noble, I do it not as an individual or even the head of House Beaumont, but as the representative of that collective effort and all of its history. That is why my word is worth more than that of a merchant motivated by personal profit or the petty interests held by any particular individual." Claire shrank away from Lady Beaumont as she spoke. Reed, however, didn't hesitate to point out what everyone else seemed to be thinking. "That history my lady's talkin' about ain't so great if you ask me." The young noblewoman instantly deflated, her proud mask wavering in the flickering firelight. "You are right, of course," Lady Beaumont said. "Anyone living in the Azalisian marches would have difficulty accepting what I said. Marquis Bloomrush is far from a shining example of leadership, and I have only recently discovered of my Lord Father's lackluster tenure as your liege, but I truly mean everything that I say. I am thankful that everyone is generous enough to allow me time to prove myself as your new lord." With that, the Countess retreated to the shelter of her wagon. The men gathered at the fire exchanged silent looks before digging into their meals. Reed shuffled over, plate in hand. "What do you think?" he asked. "You don't believe what you said just now?" Liam asked back. "Oh, I do," the woodsman said as he soaked his hardened bread into a bowl of stew. "I was just wondering what you think about it." Liam thought back to the different kingdoms he had visited in the past year. It was only then that he realized much he had gotten around recently. "I think the houses of every kingdom try to be like what Lady Beaumont described," Liam replied. "And by houses, I mean the nobles and everyone attached to them, the establishment she described. It takes a lot of people to make a fief work and everyone has a job to do. The problem is that there are a lot of ways to reach that ideal and Re-Estize just happens to be behind all the other kingdoms when it comes to being, functional. Is it really that bad here?" Reed asked. "I always figured every kingdom was about the same." "The different kingdoms I've been to aren't perfect," Liam answered. "People can be greedy, selfish, cowardly, or just plain stupid. But, somehow, Re-Estize is the only place where they let all that win. There are places out there where entire towns and cities are eaten by beastmen, yet the people find it within themselves to get back up no matter how many times they're knocked down. Here, humans prey on you and you just accept it. You know why that is," Reed said. "Men aren't made equal. Even if you don't count the 6 arms, the 8 fingers are plenty powerful. A guy like Olin can take out whole gangs without breaking a sweat, and they have hundreds of people just as strong as he is. Better to live and do what you can to help your people survive than to die fighting a fight you'll never win. I used to think like that," Liam said. "Back when I was just a kid scratching up a living on the streets. Now that I've seen what others face elsewhere and how they carry themselves, that kind of thinking doesn't make sense to me anymore. Humans don't have tough hides or powerful natural weapons. They don't have supernatural strength or magical abilities. Compared to an ogre or a beastman, it's easy to make a human bleed, and if it can bleed, then it can die." "That's some dangerous thinking," Reed said. "Almost anyone would get themselves killed trying to follow it and everyone else would call them fools." "That's the swindle, isn't it?" Liam replied. "Organizations like the 8 Fingers, no, even a bit thug controlling their little part of an alley, rely on the idea that people tend to have a short-sighted view of the world. They want everyone to think that no one will come and help. That no one cares. That they're alone. Most of the battle is won when they can get their victims to accept the reality they've crafted for them, and that pit only gets deeper with every passing day. After that, enforcing that reality was only a matter of feeding people excuses and ways to cope while making an example of someone once in a while. It surprised him that some variation of the same game was being played no matter where he went. Maybe it was just an inevitable part of human society. So where does that leave us?" Reed asked. "The 8 Fingers ain't exactly getting in our way." "They are not," Liam agreed, "but the reality they've created still lives. Lady Beaumont's work will go a long way towards making things better. As members of her retinue, you need to help her out with that." "Retinue?" The woodsman snorted. "Even if you dress us up in house colors, it won't change what we are." "Believe it or not," Liam said, "most men-at-arms come from common backgrounds. Sure, they get training and equipment, but that only helps them better understand where they stand in the grand scheme of things and how they can do their part. I don't think you guys need a knight to tell you what's needed to help Lady Beaumont lead everyone out of this mess. That's another thing that's been nagging at me all this time," Reed said. "How do we know she's actually doing that? When she first came to Beaumont County, she was just an annoying highborn brat. The moment you appear, she starts running things as if they're second nature to her. You been telling her what to do?" Liam blinked in surprise. "Me? No. I've actually been instructed to minimize my influence on her work. Then how the hell is she doing it? Well, she's the only daughter of a count, Liam said. House Bloomrush would have invested in her education as part of making her an attractive marriage prospect. She probably never had the chance to apply her education until recently. In hindsight, the Countess' rapid progress made sense. Her father had left House Beaumont in a ruinous state, and any suppression by the Eight Fingers that might have occurred in response to her attempting to rectify the situation was prohibited. According to the scriptures, it was the sort of challenging scenario that would greatly accelerate Lady Beaumont's development. No one would purposely screw a fief up just to train a noble, but there was nothing wrong with taking advantage of a bad situation that was already happening. They broke camp early the next morning in hopes that they would make the city gates by midday. Unfortunately, their efforts seemed in vain when they arrived at the end of a long line of wagons that had a far shorter distance to travel. Liam hung to the side of the Countess' wagon to keep his boots out of the mud as the sun traversed unseen behind the clouds overhead. Like Erantle, Bloomrush was built for defense against invaders, though the primary threat in the region was not the Empire or the Theocracy, but the nearby populations of tribal demi-humans and other denizens of the wilderness. Or themselves. Liam eyed the sentries manning the city's fortifications. Their livery didn't match the colors whipping in the wind over the city's northern gate, and the air they gave off was nothing like the retinues he had observed in the Holy Kingdom or even Ravel. He opened the tarp covering Lady Beaumont's wagon a crack. "My lady." "Yes, what is it?" Men in unfamiliar livery are stationed on the walls. A silver fox on black and white and a brown boar on green and yellow. "Those are mercenaries," the young noblewoman told him. "Silver Foxearth and the Razorspine Regiment. They're two of the largest mercenary companies in the Azalisian marches." "Why were they hired to man the walls?" Liam asked. "Doesn't House Bloomrush have its own security?" "They are likely on the ground," the Countess answered. "Mercenaries can't be trusted for proper militia work." In other words, House Bloomrush had people present, but not enough to secure the city and deal with the fire's aftermath. Liam's gaze went past the line of wagons laden with their loads of timber, stone, and ore to the narrow gate built into the Bloomrush's northern wall. Sure enough, he immediately spotted a knight in a Bloomrush surcoat overseeing the customs staff. Couldn't they call on their vassals for help? They would be far more trustworthy than a bunch of mercenaries. A long sigh issued from the opening in the tarp. "House Bloomrush doesn't trust anyone, Liam," Lady Beaumont told him. "Mercenaries are more reliable in their eyes because the forces of any local lord may try to abuse their de facto power to steal from the city or exert their influence on the population. Is that something that happens here?" "It's not impossible," the Countess replied. "Then won't all the men accompanying you get us in trouble with House Bloomrush?" Liam asked. "I believe Mr. Olin should be able to get us into the city without issue," Lady Beaumont answered. "What's the Eight Fingers' relationship with House Bloomrush?" "It's rather simple," the young noblewoman replied. "They pay House Bloomrush to look the other way. Once in a while, they'll do their dirty work, weakening vassals who grow too powerful or wealthy for the Marquis' liking or murdering uppity merchants. They're also a channel for various collectibles that the Marquis favors." "Did House Bloomrush pop right out of a bard's tale?" Liam muttered. "I've heard that performers in lower-class establishments can be quite unforgiving in their portrayals of aristocrats," the young noblewoman said, "but I'm uncertain if they're capable of rendering the superlative quality of House Bloomrush. At any rate, I can only imagine that House Bloomrush will be especially aggressive with all that's happened to their city. We will have to be very wary if they come to interact with us, but I believe we'll also be able to take advantage of several conditions created by their behavior." "Such as?" "I'll have to hear what's going on in the city and speak with my peers before I venture any specific predictions. Broadly speaking, House Bloomrush is sure to shift most of the burdens related to this disaster onto the shoulders of its vassals and their subjects." Liam supposed that was why Marquis Bloomrush kept his vassals poor and weak. The man was so focused on staying on top that the Azalisian marches were stuck in a woefully underdeveloped state, but he didn't care so long as it allowed him to remain in control. A frigid drizzle started pelting them just before it came their turn to enter the city. Liam quietly made his way over to the front of the caravan, where the knight stationed at the gate was speaking with Olin. "That's a whole lot of men, Olin," the knight said as he ran a cold eye over their wagons. "Not much more than I left with, Sir Damien," Olin replied. "We've come in with Beaumont's first winter shipment." "Beaumont?" A hint of incredulity colored the knight's tone. "Nothing's come out of there for over a year." "The new countess has been busy trying to fix that," Olin said. Sir Damien's look turned calculating as he rubbed one end of his moustache. "Quite the success for one so young," the knight said. "I take it that Lady Beaumont is present?" "She is," Olin nodded, "but it's been a miserable journey. She's probably not in the mood to entertain anyone at the moment." The knight scoffed. "I'll be the judge of that," he said. "If our young countess has been as successful as you say, Lord Reginald will wish to have a word with her." As the knight turned on his heel, Liam retreated up the opposite side of the caravan to the countess' wagon. Lady Beaumont and Claire both started in fright when he leapt onto the back of the wagon bed. He scanned the interior of the cozy-looking space, finding his heating hoop placed atop a stack of accounts. The countess looked up at him in confusion as he grabbed the magic item. "Liam, what are you doing?" "Deactivating this. There's one Sir Damien riding over to see you." "Sir Damien? Wait, I'm not decent yet." The young noblewoman's teeth began to chatter as the wagon's interior rapidly lost its warmth. Fortunately, for whatever reason, Sir Damien insisted on having his warhorse delivered so he could address the countess on horseback, giving them several minutes to prepare for his arrival. As the two girls started making their preparations, Liam closed up the back of the wagon before hopping off and making sure the tarps covering the vehicle were tied shut. "There's a knight comin'?" Reed asked. "Yeah," Liam answered. "Do you know this Sir Damien guy?" Reed shook his head. "We barely see any knights around our part of the march and they don't stick around any longer than they need to. What should we do?" "That's a good question." Liam considered Reed and his men. By nearly any measure, they looked like a gang of woodsmen. Trying to pass them off as professional armsmen probably wouldn't work. "This knight is proud enough to get his horse from the stables before speaking with Lady Beaumont," Liam said. "You guys don't look like anyone important right now, so just act like some subjects she's gathered to help with stuff." "Shouldn't be hard," Reed said. "That's pretty much what we are." "No," Liam told the woodsman, "you are not. You're all members of Lady Beaumont's retinue. For now, it's easier to act lower than your station because that station has rules you're not aware of or used to yet. I've heard enough about House Bloomrush that I know their people are the type to stir up trouble whenever it suits them. Just keep your heads down, speak only when you're spoken to, and let Countess Beaumont do the talking anytime else." The sound of unseen hooves splashing over the waterlogged clay road slowly grew closer. Liam turned and stepped up onto the footboard hanging off the back of the wagon. Sir Damien finally appeared in the archway of the gate, galloping his charger over before reining it in beside the Countess' wagon. The knight peered at Liam with a suspicious look. "You're a bit young to be a footman," he said. "I am what my lady made me, sir," Liam replied. "Humph. Couldn't you have found your mistress a better vehicle?" "It's the winter roads, sir. A city carriage wouldn't survive them." "How shall I announce your arrival, sir?" "Sir Damien Dale Whiteford. Lady Beaumont should know who I am." Liam felt a bit silly leaning into a wagon with nothing but a flimsy tarp separating the occupants from the knight standing next to it. "Miss Claire," he said, "Sir Damien Dale Whiteford is here to see Lady Beaumont." The maid replied with a clueless look. Countess Beaumont yanked her deeper into the wagon. Liam emerged from the wagon, holding the knight's gaze as a bout of furious whispering ensued. "Is the way to the upper city safe, Sir Damien?" Liam asked. "Our men guard the main thoroughfares," the knight answered, but the riffraff still dares to show their faces every now and then. Be on guard for dirty waifs trying to sneak in to pilfer your supplies. Thank you for the warning, Sir Damien, Liam nodded. I'm sure the men will be able to keep that sort of trouble at bay. Sir Damien's gaze shifted past the wagon to the retinue behind it. Reed and his men shifted on their feet as they turned their gazes downward, looking about as impressive as a fresh levy. The knight's hand came up to stroke the end of his blonde moustache again. They are a bit raw to be a proper retinue, don't you think? Yes, sir, Liam said. These men were just recently assembled to escort shipments to the city. Honestly, they're more at home in our woods. The knight looked away with a noncommittal grunt. Claire's head popped out from the back of the wagon a moment later. My lady will see you now, she said. Even Sir Damien seemed at a loss as to how to proceed. He froze when the Countess' head emerged in the place of her maid's. Sir Damien, the young noblewoman smiled brightly in greeting. If I'm not mistaken, it's been nearly half a year since we last spoke. You'll forgive me if I decline to step out into these conditions. Think nothing of it, Countess Beaumont, the knight bowed politely in response, and it is ever a pleasure to see you. I have it on good word that you've been working hard to return your lands to a productive state. My Lord Reginald will be pleased to know that House Beaumont remains loyal to House Bloomrush in these troubling times. I was most distressed to discover what awaited us on the other side of the pass, Lady Beaumont said. Rumors have been flying up and down the highway, but I would prefer to hear the truth of this tragedy from a reputable source. The knight sneered as his gaze passed the line of wagons to the city beyond. What else could it be? He said. The sheer amount of vermin infesting the lower city finally reached the point that disaster became inevitable. We can thank the king and that stupid daughter of his for this debacle. Pandering to the filth never results in a positive outcome. How upsetting, the Countess sighed. What are Lord Reginald's plans going forward? What choice do we have but to rebuild? Sir Damien replied, the burden of reconstruction falls upon the shoulders of the aristocracy and the riffraff will never appreciate our sacrifice on their behalf. I see, Lady Beaumont said. How will House Bloomrush's vassals be contributing to the recovery efforts? Nothing that the Azalisian marches doesn't have an abundance of, the knight said as he reached into his surcoat and withdrew a scroll. A special reconstruction tax is being levied. Each fief will pay triple its annual taxes, preferably in the form of ore, lumber, stone, and other materials required for reconstruction. It isn't required all at once, of course, so House Bloomrush is willing to be flexible so long as the city's stockpiles are amply supplied. That seems reasonable, the Countess nodded. Where shall the goods be delivered? The castle yard, Sir Damien said. Would you like an escort, my lady? Thank you for the offer, Sir Damien, Lady Beaumont said, but I'll be stopping by the manor first. Have there been any issues in the upper city? General maintenance has been behind with all that's happened, but little more than that. In that case, I should be about my business. Thank you for your kind assistance, Sir Damien. Have a good afternoon, my lady. With another polite bow, the knight wheeled his horse around and trotted it off in the direction of the gatehouse. Not long after, the Countess' wagon started moving forward again. A low murmur rose from Reed's men as crossing into the city revealed the full extent of the damage from the fires. The charred frames of countless wooden buildings lined the streets, many still smoldering from the blaze that had consumed them. It was easier to count the number of buildings that had survived unscathed than the other way around. My lady, Liam asked in a low voice, what did Sir Damien mean by this being the fault of the crown? He's likely referring to some of the legislation passed by the royal court over the last few years, Lady Beaumont replied. Normally, when the towns and cities get too crowded, the excess population is rounded up and sold to the nearby mines. Now that slavery is illegal, there's no incentive to deal with overcrowding. So the people have no work and nowhere to go, Liam said, yet that's somehow their fault. It's unreasonable to fault anyone on the matter, the Countess said. One cannot be blamed for being born, nor can they be blamed for wanting to live. There simply isn't enough to go around no matter how talented the administration is. Liam had heard that reasoning before. Or, rather, it was the reality that most human countries in the region faced. Rural tenancies could only support a certain number of people, and how much work was available in urban centers was limited by how productive the land was. Beyond electing to participate in almsgiving at the local temple, few gave any thought to the fate of the impoverished. A skinny man in well-worn clothing detached himself from the burnt-out shell of a high-street tavern, slowly shifting closer to the path of their wagons. Liam went to the foremost wagon to raise one corner of its protective cover. Upon seeing the crates of unrefined ore, the man clicked his tongue and turned away with a sour expression. That's not good. There wasn't the slightest hint of greed or speculation in the man's reaction. If anything, he was upset over having his time wasted. Liam's gaze followed the man as he entered the closest alley, which was crowded with people taking what shelter they could from the wind and rain. To his surprise, the looks that the caravan received weren't filled with fear, hunger, or desperation, but resentment. "I wonder what really happened here," Liam said. "Your guess is as good as mine," Olin replied. "Well, look who finally decided to show you." Olin seized the wiry man by the neck and scraped his impudent expression off on the nearest wall, leaving him dead at the end of a crimson smear that curved to the wooden floor. "Anyone else need a lesson in respect?" Olin asked. The groups of thugs gathered nearby looked away. Olin shook his head as he walked past them. After the loss of the 6 arms, far too many of the 8 Fingers members, particularly the ones who were confident in their strength, started testing their boundaries. The Death Knights that the Sorceress Kingdom loaned to the leadership put most challenges to rest, but one could hardly set the undead loose in the middle of a city. He made his way deeper into the alley where the local branch of the syndicate had made a temporary base out of one of the few, mostly unburnt apartments. A broad, middle-aged woman in commoner's garb crossed her arms as he approached the entrance. "You better have an explanation for this," she said. "She's angry? At me?" A slight frown tugged at the corner of his lip. Upon entering the city, the hostility directed against their caravan was tangible, but he figured it was the usual resentment against the nobility being amplified by the fire. No one was stupid enough to offer even the slightest provocation to the 8 Fingers, after all. "Someone had better start making sense soon," Olin growled. The woman, the gambling division's local officer, jerked her head, motioning for Olin to follow her inside. She led him up a narrow, creaky staircase to the apartment's 3rd floor. Unmarked crates filled its sole room, framing a tiny desk with a handful of papers scattered across its surface. "This is your doing," the woman said. "Mine. How could it possibly be my fault when I haven't been anywhere near the city for over a month? You were even there to see me off, Marla. You weren't here, but Louis was. What did he do?" Marla snorted. "What didn't he do? The same night he got here, he gathered all the men that he could and started a damn war inside the city walls. That blonde-haired brat from the Sorcerer's Kingdom told you guys to do this, right? I'd like to give him a piece of my mind. Are you crazy?" Olin grabbed Marla by the shoulders and gave her a shake. "The farther you stay away from him, the better. He might not look it, but he's every bit the monster that his masters are." "Then what do we do?" Why is she asking that? Olin could sense the fear behind the woman's angry posturing. She was hiding something. "First," he said, "tell me everything that happened after Louis got here." "I said it already, didn't I?" Marla moaned. "Louis came in last week and gathered all the fighting men. Said he had orders to get rid of the Theocracy's spies. Orders from you. People didn't think they could beat him, but Louis said he'd already offed the whole lot over the pass. Up until they reached the city, he hadn't observed any signs of collateral damage from Louis' efforts, though it was a reasonable claim. The fact that he had sent Louis to silence any Theocracy operatives shortly after initially meeting with Liam had entirely slipped Olin's mind. Still, he didn't think the plan had any downsides even if the boy proved himself to be a real agent from the Sorcerer's Kingdom. "What did they do after that?" Olin asked. They went around killing Windflower agents, Marla answered. The ones we knew about, those local guys that just sit around listening and not much else. It was as easy as Louis said it would be. They never even expected it. After that, Louis went after the people he thought might be a theocracy agent. Louis also sent a bunch of men out of the city to clear out all the places he hadn't been to at the same time. You make it sound like he was successful in his task, Olin said. How did it go from that to burning down half the city? He wasn't satisfied with the result, Marla replied. Figured there had to be more in a city like Rebloom Russia, but he couldn't find what he was looking for. Finally, he figured they'd have to retaliate if he set their chapel on fire. Huh? That was the source of the fire that had consumed the lower city? It was no wonder that the citizens were sending them murderous looks. Threatening individuals and small groups of people was a good way of maintaining a reign of terror over the populace, but becoming a clear threat to everyone unified people against their oppressors. Where's that idiot Louis now? Olin asked. Don't tell me he's gone on to wreak havoc on the next city. He's dead, Marla told him. Dead? How? Did he get lynched by a mob? I don't know how he died. Then call for someone who does, Olin said. Marla took a deep, shuddering breath. What I meant was that no one knows how he died. One moment, he was standing there grinning over his handiwork. The next, he fell to the street, dead. That doesn't make any sense. That's what happened. Panic rose in the woman's voice. Everyone around him saw it happen. No one attacked him. There weren't any visible wounds. Not that anyone would touch him to check. People are saying that the gods struck him down for what he did. Preposterous, Olin spat. Where's his corpse? Where it fell. Like I said, no one wanted to touch him. These people are useless. Olin stormed out of the apartment in disgust. An officer in the gambling division should have known how empty people's superstitions were. Olin. Marla called out after him, what are you going to do? What everyone else is afraid to, Olin replied. He made his way across the lower city to the temple district. It didn't take him long to find the burnt-out shell of the Chapel of the Six amongst the shrines and chapels of the other minor faiths. As Marla described, Louis' corpse lay on the street in front of the building. While the city folk didn't dare to disturb the body out of fear of being cursed or struck down in turn, the other denizens of the Rebloom Russia held no such qualms. Olin kicked away a pair of rats before kneeling to inspect the former bandit leader. Are these people idiots? Even his purse is untouched. Olin scanned his surroundings, but didn't spot any potential observers. Everything that might be considered valuable remained on the dead man's person. Normally, he would have been stripped within minutes. After checking for traps, Olin took Louis coins plus everything that linked him to the 8 fingers. Unfortunately, he couldn't find any hint of what killed the man. No bruises or lacerations, no burns or anything pointing at magic. Was he poisoned? Louis was one of the toughest people he knew, so the chance of that was slim to none in those circumstances. Needless to say, the robust frontiersman was heartier than an ox, so a fatal health condition was also out of the question. With nothing more to gain from his investigation, Olin casually strolled away from the site of the unsolved mystery, mulling over his next move. Had the fire quelled any thought of further retaliation against the 8 fingers? The Windflower scripture, as a rule, didn't butt heads with local organizations unless something forced their hand. House Bloom Rush's forces were also making a show of force in the streets, if not much more than that. If that was the case, he had some time to advance some plans of his own. For better or worse, Liam was busy with his assignments, which left Olin as little more than a local guide. This was something he was more than happy to leverage. The mere fact that he was in the company of an agent from the Sorceress Kingdom implied that he had their new master's blessing, at least when he framed things that way. As a result, it was far easier to collect funds and recruit new underlings than it usually was. Speaking of which, the entire city is in tatters after that fire. There should be plenty of talented fellows looking for new opportunities. If he played his cards right, He could reorganize the local Eight Fingers branches and its affiliates to his benefit. From there, he would have the resources of an entire city and its territories at his disposal. The fools who thought they could direct things from the comfort of the capital would be clueless that their power was being subverted. Indeed, if he looked at things in that light, recent events came together to create a blessing that uniquely benefited him. His mood greatly improved. Olin returned to Marla's makeshift base of operations. This time, no one rose to challenge him or make mocking remarks. "You are back," Marla said as he once again entered her cramped little office. "Have our members been attacked since the fire?" Olin asked. "No," the woman answered. "I doubt anyone wants to give House Bloomrush an excuse to sick their mercenaries on them. If you ask me, it'll stay that way until the city's rebuilt." It was a sensible prediction. An inoperable city didn't generate revenue, so House Bloomrush would make sure that they could get back to charging rents and taxes as soon as possible. That same period of reconstruction and reinstatement of business was also the prime window of opportunity for the Eight Fingers to tighten its grip on Bloomrush. "Have you already come up with a plan for that?" Olin asked. "I've been working on it," Marla answered, "but, honestly, it's tough. House Bloomrush is trying to gain complete control over every aspect of the city, minus the temples. Even if our warehouses didn't burn down, Lord Reginald is sourcing his materials exclusively from House Bloomrush's vassals." "I heard about that," Olin said. "Did procurement's ledgers survive?" Marla gestured loosely at the crates stacked up along the office's walls. "We didn't have any time to be nice and neat about it," she said, "but whatever survived of them should be in these crates. I'm already busy with my own work, so don't expect any help." "Do you have a new casino site lined up?" Olin asked as he took the nearest crate and started sorting through its contents. "All these mercenaries and armsmen deployed in the city will have coin to throw away." "Of that, I'm well aware," Marla sighed. "The problem's that this isn't exactly a routine situation. Normally, we could at least find a warehouse and convert it into one of our establishments, but House Bloomrush has taken control of any still standing. I was thinking of muscling in on a few inns to turn them into gambling dens and brothels, but, well, we don't have any muscle." "You don't?" Olin furrowed his brow. "What happened to all the locals that Louis recruited?" "Fled the city," Marla replied. "They didn't want any of what Louis got. Fools should have thought about that before they decided to desecrate a temple." Despite what should have been bad news, Olin's mood further improved. "I have the men," Olin said. "Excellent," Marla smiled. "You can start by—" "Hold on to that thought," Olin told her. "Before we go around shaking things up, I'm going to speak with Lord Reginald. If we can gain his cooperation, things will go all the better for us." "I thought I just said that Lord Reginald was doing everything he could to exert complete control over the city. That includes purging it of our influence, Olin." Olin smirked at the woman's naivete. She may have been a syndicate officer, but the way that she seemed to believe that rules meant anything suggested that she had risen to the position because of her administrative skills. Whoever promoted her had done so because she was both useful and harmless, and Olin would take full advantage of that. "That doesn't sound like House Bloomrush to me," he told her. "Wait here while I visit the castle. We'll see how upright our dear Lord Reginald has become. Oh, while I'm away, find those ledgers I asked about." Marla watched him silently as he made his way back outside. Not that she could do anything. Might made right, especially in the Azalisian marches, and the woman had little of note in that regard. Olin, on the other hand, could station security at every gambling den, brothel, and warehouse that they occupied, giving him de facto control over the Eight Fingers operations in the Azalisian marches. He made a few rounds of the lower city, committing the new state of Bloomrush to memory. Between the incessant rain and the destroyed buildings, it was much cleaner than when he had visited last. House Bloomrush's regiments were doing their part to keep it that way. Olin stopped at one of the blocks near the gate to the upper city, where dozens of men in Bloomrush livery were clearing the place of citizens so a priest of earth and his acolytes could conduct their purification rites. Even in the wake of a disaster that wiped out half of the city, the clergy looked as sanctimonious as ever. The undead popping up in the middle of their cleanup would be a riot worth watching. A profitable one. As Olin made his way to Countess Beaumont's manor in the upper city, he entertained the thought of asking Liam to lend a hand with that. The appearance of the undead, nothing major, just a handful of skeletons and zombies, would make House Bloomrush much more amenable to any offers to expedite the reconstruction process. Olin, one of his men, greeted him as he entered the manor grounds. "What's the word?" "Everything's fucked," Olin replied, "but I can work with that." "Where are the men?" "They've settled in the gardens behind the manor as you've ordered. It's disappointing that the city's in this state, but it's still better than mucking it out in the woods." "Things may start looking up sooner than you think," Olin said. "Where's Liam?" "Last I saw, he went into the manor. Probably fooling around with his women." Olin sneered at his memory of the past few weeks. At first, he figured that Lady Beaumont would have Liam wrapped around her little finger in short order, but it turned out that he had seduced her instead. Both her and her maid. Whatever else he might think of the Sorcerer's Kingdom's agent, he was forced to admit he had been trained well. "Should I send someone to find him?" "No, that's fine," Olin said. "I have a few more things to take care of. Tell the men that they'll have something to do soon." "Will do, boss." After changing out of his nondescript garb into something more suited to meeting with a high noble, Olin made his way up the winding cobblestone streets of the upper city to the entrance of Castle Bloomrush. Several bowmen leveled their weapons as an armsman walked out to intercept him well before he reached the gatehouse. "Stop right there," he ordered. Olin stood in place, desiring nothing more than to slit the armsman's throat as he deliberately paced around him. "You do not represent any of my lord's vassals," the armsman said, "nor do you have the look of an aristocrat. Did you think you could gain access to the castle simply by dressing yourself up?" "I was making myself presentable for an audience with Lord Reginald, if you must know," Olin replied. "Lord Reginald has no interest in entertaining any merchants." "I'm no merchant. Let Lord Reginald know that Olin's here to see him." The armsman frowned slightly at his insistence. He was probably used to shooing away desperate petitioners in the wake of the fire. The man walked back to the gate, exchanging words with several of his fellows before ducking under the portcullis and vanishing from view. 10 minutes later, he reappeared. "Lord Reginald will see you in the Great Hall," the armsman said in an entirely unapologetic tone. "This way." 4 more armsmen fell in behind Olin as he followed his guide through the gate. Stockpiles of construction materials filled the castle yard, sheltered from the rain by sheets of tied-down canvas. The steady rhythm of hammers on anvils and saws on timber competed with the sound of the pelting rain. Olin's gaze lingered on the handful of artisans at work as they made their way to the castle keep. They were probably a part of the castle staff rather than members of the workshops in the lower city. "Are you trying to do all of the work here?" he asked. "Lord Reginald is still negotiating with the guilds," his escort told him. "They are being most unreasonable, considering the circumstances. We will rebuild the city ourselves if need be, and if that happens, you can rest assured that we'll be renegotiating the rents." In other words, House Bloomrush didn't want to pay guild rates and used them to fabricate and reason to raise rents across the city. It also explained why they were funneling imports directly to the castle. If the guilds didn't work for them, then they wouldn't be allowed to work for anyone. Olin stomped the mud free from his boots before entering the shadowed confines of the castle keep. He was led directly to the great hall on the main floor, wherein Lord Reginald was seated behind the torchlit table at its head. 6 knights and a dozen armsmen were stationed evenly around the room. "Olin," Lord Reginald greeted him as he walked up the rich blue carpet leading to the base of the head table's dais. "Your appearance at this time must surely be a coincidence." "It is, Lord Reginald," Olin offered a respectful bow. "I was shocked to find the city ablaze when I crossed over the southern pass." "Truly?" The nobleman raised an eyebrow. "By all accounts, the fire was caused by a gang intentionally setting one of the older buildings in the temple district alight. During the days leading to the fire, there have been reports of periodic violence, also conducted by gangs in the lower city. You truly know nothing about this? I do not, Olin said. It's been at least a month since I last visited your city, and my time away has been out on the frontier. Lord Reginald leveled a piercing gaze upon him. He very much took after his father, down to the thin moustache that matched his slender frame. Yet it is still your responsibility, he said. That was the agreement, yes? You keep the gangs under control, and we make certain allowances regarding your business in the city. Considering your catastrophic failure to uphold your end of the deal, I can only recommend to my Lord Father that we strongly rethink our arrangement. Why does he have to pin his grievance on me specifically? Normally, the blame for the incident would have gone to the Six Arms, but those idiots had gone and gotten themselves killed. After that, everyone wanted to take control of the security division, but no one wanted to put in the work. The reason why wasn't a mystery. The security division was a group held together by sheer ruthlessness, and that leadership style went all the way down to the smallest gang. They could use Death Knights to force the issue on a case-by-case basis, but maintaining control of the division was a feat that required the brutal charisma possessed by individuals like Zero. That being said, it was no longer an issue in Bloomrush. House Bloomrush cared nothing for what happened in other cities, so Olin would be able to satisfy him so long as he was the sole provider of muscle for the local branches. I deeply regret you've come to that conclusion, Lord Reginald, Olin said. In my defense, I can only say that this disaster was beyond my control. But dwelling on the past profits us little. How about we address the more pressing matters facing us presently? There's been a disastrous harvest in the north, and labor shortages elsewhere have put the entire kingdom at risk of famine. There will be no easy replacement for the food Bloomrushers lost to the fire. On the contrary, Lord Reginald told him, the threat of famine is not an issue. Rather than that, it is something to be taken advantage of. Those ever-greedy guilds refuse to relent on the matter of their exorbitant rates. Their members will come to their senses once their families begin to starve. What about the unskilled laborers? Olin asked. The fate of vagrants is not my concern, Lord Reginald answered. They are not contracted tenants of House Bloomrush, and we thus have no obligation to ensure their well-being. It would be convenient if your organization has some designs on them that will help clear the streets. It just so happens that we do, Olin smiled. On an unrelated note, I've noticed that you have some untapped revenues in the form of bored mercenaries with bulging purses. We can help House Bloomrush recapture some of its expenditures. I suppose that you could, Lord Reginald said. What's the catch? I want the Northern Harbour block. What? Lord Reginald slammed his palms on the table as he rose to his feet. The ring of steel sounded as his men drew their sidearms. You push the limits of my magnanimity, Olin, the nobleman growled. On the contrary, Olin replied, unbothered, the net area our establishments occupied before the fire was at least that much, and what I've asked for is the least valuable piece of riverfront. By consolidating our former holdings into a single complex, we'll be better able to serve the city's needs. If things go well, you may be proud enough to consider it an attraction. The lordling reseated himself and his men resheathed their weapons. He unrolled what Olin could only assume was a map of Bloomrush, putting on a show of careful contemplation. What of the harbour itself? Lord Reginald asked. Surely you don't need so much infrastructure for whatever you're planning. You are correct, my lord, Olin said. 2 berths reserved for the exclusive use of our pleasure craft should be sufficient. Several moments of silence passed before the lordling slowly nodded his head. Very well, the southern harbour block is yours to do with as you wish. In return, I expect some happy mercenaries and 1/5 of this new establishment's revenues. 1/5? Olin frowned. I believe our old arrangement was 1/10. 1/4, then. Also, you're on your own when it comes to materials and labor for construction. 1/4, Olin reluctantly agreed. Expect my organization to hold House Bloomrush to its word, Lord Reginald. With their business concluded, Olin was unceremoniously rushed back out of the castle. It was only after he entered the lower city that he allowed himself an ambitious smile. He was getting away with far more than he expected. Whether Lord Reginald had been more desperate than anticipated or simply looking to negotiate a more lucrative agreement for his house didn't matter. Now that he had House Bloomrush's permission to redevelop a piece of the waterfront, the syndicate members in the city would defer to him as the path of least resistance. Losing a quarter of his revenues initially felt like a painful sacrifice to make, but he suspected that the new complex would bring in far more than the fragmented operations of Bloomrush's past. Marla was still in her office when he returned to her base. He almost laughed at the look of resentment she sent his way as she knelt amidst the clutter generated by her task. "It turns out that our dear Lord Reginald wasn't anywhere near as much of a saint as you believed," he told her. "I never claimed he was a saint," Marla grumbled. "I take it that the meeting went well?" "You could say that," Olin replied. "I secured the southern harbor block." Sheets of paper drifted over the floor as Marla abruptly rose, mouth ajar. "The southern harbor block? How? Does it matter?" Olin shrugged. "The point is that we're clear to build our hospitality complex. Inns, brothels, eating establishments, different levels of quality for different levels of clientele. The same will apply to the casino on the inside. No more makeshift betting houses or gambling dens. This will be big enough to put our operations in the capital to shame." "Which is too big," Marla said with a calculating look. "We don't have the manpower to do this." Olin raised his hands to indicate the city surrounding them. "There's plenty of labor to be had. They'll be trying to break down your doors once they figure out that working for us will be one of the only ways they'll be able to feed themselves this winter." "That'll work for common laborers," Marla said, "but what about skilled artisans? The guilds will be stubborn about working for us and they'd rather turn to House Bloomrush if food becomes a problem. I'll send a few dozen men to help you sort things out. Break as many fingers as you need to. Oh, and be sure to gather all the best-looking girls and boys before they start getting sick and malnourished." "Me?" Marla raised an eyebrow. "That's a job for the prostitution division. I'm in gambling. We'll have to wait until they send a new guy from the copy." Marla fell silent as Olin raised a finger in the air between them. "Or," he said, "you can be in charge of both gambling and prostitution. Everyone's so busy these days as it is." A gleam of greed lit the woman's eyes as she licked her lips. "Of course, boss," Marla said. "I'll get right to work."